the first movement in a series of 9, and I'm just doing the first movement. So, for those of you that are not familiar with Qigong is the moving of energy through one's body in concert with the universe. So you can start with your legs apart, and then you're gonna, it works in conjunction with the breath. So every movement is an in-breath and an out-breath. I don't expect you to integrate all those pieces, but I will talk through it as we go. So in this one, you're going to take an in-breath in, and on the release, you're going to put your feet together. So it's an in-breath in, and then together. So working with the Qi, this is bringing together of heaven and earth. So we're going to start by lowering down into heaven, into earth. And you're going to draw up through your hands the Qi from the earth, and you're going to draw it all the way up. Imagine it coming up through your body to the heart level. Then you're going to relax and hold it there for a minute. And you're going to exhale and drop your hands, but keep the energy in your heart. The next movement is we're going to raise our arms outward with an in-breath up into the heavens and connect to the heavens. And with an out-breath, and you can breathe in and out as you need to, but with an out-breath, you're drawing heaven down into the heart to meet with the energy you pulled up from the earth. Now you come down, out, in-breath down, yes, in-breath down, and in-breath in, and send the energy from your heart out into the universe. And you can think of somebody when you practice this that you want to send healing to, love to, equanimity to, and that person can be yourself. And an in-breath to bring it all back into you. What you send out comes back. And an exhale down to ground. And an in-breath, and you're going to gather the Qi ball and hold it there in your dantian, so below the solar plexus and navel, dantian. And you're going to seal that energy. Release. That's it. I just wanted to ground. That's the first movement in a series of 9. That's going to become a little important in my talk. Creativity is more than a creative, imaginary, intuitive, productive, or reproductive element. Its visible effectiveness is achieved where the strength of the inner constellation and the degree of intensity are equal to its potency. That is, where its demand is able to find a response. It is fulfilled in individuals to the same degree as in entire generations to the extent that they are ready for it. That was Jean Gebser in Ever-Present Origin. The earliest form of cultural narrative sought to answer the unknowable question of existence, and they were known as creation stories. Considered to be among the most important types of myth, creation stories, even scientific ones, arise at the point where the edges of human knowing collide with the unknown, and they reveal that whenever known reality stops, human beings will project archetypal images. They'll create a story for that. Relationship between creation stories and the visual image is one explicitly grounded in ideas of early magic and the relationship between the visible and invisible worlds. The ability to imagine the sacred cosmos and the power to bring it into form illustrates the ancient belief that human purpose is fundamentally connected to a higher role as a participant in the manifestation of what is valued and held as most sacred. I worked with the work of Maria Louise von Franz quite a bit. She was a Jungian who worked with Carl Jung, was in that circle.
She described creation stories as the most important stories in terms of understanding our own existence, because they refer to the most basic problems of human life, not only the ultimate meaning of human life, the existence of human life, but of the entire cosmos. So creation stories describe for us why we're here, what we're here to do, how we lay out our cities, how we found our worlds. And Mircea Eliade talks a lot about the founding of the world as an eruption of the sacred into a space. It always comes as a violence. It always comes as an eruption. It always comes as something that disrupts what is there, and it moves into a particular harmony of its own. You look at a lot of early structures, they're going to start with the city center. The sacred tree grows up from that spot. They divide out into a quadrant. Most early cities follow this pattern, and Jung talked about this number 4 being the completion. I'll talk about it a little bit more too. Creativity can be thought of as the ability to be innovative, inventive, and highly attuned to the faculty of the imagination. It helps to realize that imagination shares a root word with the words image, imaginal, magi, magic. They all share the same root word. The link between creativity and image, including the written word, is described by Gebser as a visibly emerging impulse of origin, where through creativity, a preconscious origin becomes the conscious present as an energy or a potency. The idea of a preconscious origin from which all things arise is an idea also expressed by Carl Karenye in Essays of the Science of Mythology, where he describes the ultimate root of the mythological origin as the foundational ground of being, the unus mundus. With the construction of a new world in miniature, and this is Karenye saying this, an image of the macrocosm, mythological fundamentalism is translated into action. So it begins with an image of what we perceive the macrocosm to be. It translates into what we perceive our role in that to be, and then we begin to build that. So it's a founding or a Gründung. I don't speak German, so I might get some of these wrong for those of you who speak German. The ground of being or matrix from which all of life originates is understood and portrayed mythically in many cultures as the divine feminine, and this perception remains vital to an understanding of the underlying mythic themes in literature, poetry, and the visual image. In Coming into Being, William Irwin Thompson describes Gebser's theories about the structural transformation of consciousness as a Bewusstwerdung process, full of mystical and poetic insights. In Complex Archetype, Symbol in the Psychology of C.G. Jung, Yolanda Jacobi describes the Bewusstwerdung as an awareness of the mother standing at the beginning of all realizations.
Can you spell the German word?
Yes, it's Bewustwerdungs.
So it's Bewusstwerdung.
Say it for me, please.
Bewusstwerdung, which means becoming conscious.
Becoming conscious. And in Yolanda Jacobi's thought, it referred to this idea of the mother standing at the beginning of all. And you speaking German, I don't know, is that not your connotation of it?
Well, it could be.
Yeah.
Bewusstwerdung means becoming conscious.
Yeah, so she said it, or Yolanda Jacobi said it was the mother standing at the beginning of all realizations that indicate an explicit awareness of an origin grounded in the feminine. This eternal life-sustaining feminine principle has inspired poets throughout the ages and is connected to the idea of the muse as divine inspiration. In The White Goddess, Robert Graves asserts that the language of poetic myth in the ancient Celtic tradition was a magical language bound up with popular religious ceremonies in honor of the moon goddess, or the muse. And this remains the language of poetry. A description of the connection between the creative muse and poetry is central to the work of Gebser. He states that the creative capacity is of a spiritual nature and is to be found only in shaped or structured language, most notably in poetry. He further reveals that the significance and etymology of the word muse, musa, means ponderous and is related to the soul, to the psychic image world of myth. He reminds us that the muse is actually Mnemosyne, the goddess of memory, and the mother of the muses, who brings the recollection of an internal event to conscious awareness. He says, the muse is the latent memory of the world, the remembrance of creativity and of all that has been and is still to be affected in the world. Has a close connection to creativity and is able to elicit man's poetic capacities. She is the mother of the bard and is thus herself receptive, the receptress and recollectress of creativity, who awakens in the poet this inner recollection. So I don't want to read a bunch. I just wanted to read that beginning because I felt it really important to get to the point of the muse. I'm a painter. I grew up in LA. I was born in 1960. So you talk about those sirens going off. We heard those air raid sirens every Wednesday. They would go off, and you'd hear the air raid sirens. And we had duck and cover drills. And John brought that up, and I was thinking that exactly, that we grew up under this umbrella of the world is going to end. And because I grew up with this kind of consciousness, I just felt like it didn't matter what I did because the world was going to end and I didn't really care anyway. So I made a lot of mistakes in my early life and had to go down a lot of rabbit holes. When I kind of finally woke up in my early 20s and thought, wow, there's babies being born and the world's going on and I better decide that I'm going to do something. The only thing I knew how to do was paint. So I'm a painter. This is part of my early work from the 80s. I had a lot of stuff moving through me. Growing up in LA, it was really chaotic. It was really intense. I was in a very raw place with my work where I wanted to express this rawness moving through me, this unrefined energy that could not find a way to self into beauty. And it's what I grew up with in LA. It was kind of the pulse of the city when I was growing up there. Here's another later piece. And there was a lot of fracturing in my own psyche going on, and there was just a lot of things going on in 1960s, 1970. I grew up in Whittier. I told someone earlier, it's the town of Nixon. I went to the church that Nixon went to. So this was I grew up in my family was not religious, but one of my teachers took me to a Quaker church. Quaker tradition is you go inside and do silent prayer and you find your own inner light, much like the Hashia tradition of Eastern Orthodox Catholicism. So I have friends that are going to Catholic churches and I'm trying to figure out, don't get this whole religion thing. And for me, it was this inner connected experience, very close to Buddhism. A lot of people I know who were Quaker kind of transitioned into the Buddhist practice. They're similar for me. They're similar. In 2001, I had the good fortune while I was working on my MFA in Arts and Consciousness in the Bay Area to travel to China, Hangzhou, China, which I realize I share with some people in the room. We were there at the same exact time. I studied traditional Chinese arts and healing when I was there. And I was there when 9/11 happened. My friends were there too. When I returned, this is how my work transformed. So I was very much dropping into the still point of the turning world. I was distilling my energy, distilling my energy. And I began to work very consciously with the idea of the field. This was in 2001. So I was working with this idea of the origin and what kind of is arising up out of the origin all the time. In this talk, I'm probably gonna skip a lot of this, but my initial intention was to talk about qualitative versus quantitative awareness, which for me is represented, it's the difference between Eastern ideas of number and Western ideas of number. I wanted to do a little comparison between Jung's idea of individuation and Gebser's a-perspectival. Forgive me for saying Gebser wrong. I say Gebser, it's Gebser, but for me, Jung's individuation deals with the micro, which is the personal, and Gebser's is more addressing the macro, which is the collective. For me, they work in tandem. They're the same. The practice is the same. The way it manifests out, I feel from Gebser's perspective, he is addressing it more from a collective place. The synthesis that arises as a result of the individual practicing individuation or arriving at a place of individuation. Transparency and intensity, understanding those as lived experience, which people have gone over. And I'm only going to talk about intensity in relationship to number. So I kind of gave you that little intro to it. The bulk of my presentation is going to be around the Sagrada Familia, which is in Spain. I traveled to see the Sagrada Familia. I got to travel to Spain last year. For me, the Sagrada Familia is the absolute embodiment of Gebser's thought. Antonio Gaudí is the architect that completed it. He stepped in. It was begun by another architect in 1882. Gebser took over in 1883. He said, "My client has no timeline. There's no end to when I'm going to finish this. My client has no timeline." Consequently, he worked on it until he was hit by a car when he was 75. He would hike every day 6 miles back and forth to build this construction that he had that was this embodiment of his vision. And when he was hit by the car, he was dressed in his work clothes. They thought he was homeless. Nobody stopped. He died in the street. It's tragic. It's tragic. Absolutely tragic. You see here, it's not completed still. It just got a roof in 2010. And it was inducted into the World Heritage Site at that same time in 2010 after the Olympics. It's what's known as a basilica. It's not a Catholic cathedral, it's a Catholic basilica. And the difference is a cathedral contains a bishop's throne. This does not. But they have ceremonies, not ceremonies, they have services that they do there, and you can do your tour after the services in the morning. So right here you see 4 towers. It's going to have 18, is the duplicate of 9. 9 is a very important number in Chinese number theory. So there's from my perspective, there's a precise reason why he chose 18. Each of those spires has a meaning, and I have it here and I can tell you, but I'm not going to go into what all of that is. It's very Christian in its orientation, but I think the deeper meaning is connected to the number of spires. Another reason this is really important is the way that Gaudí designed those is he took nets and he suspended them upside down and he filled them with sand. And what he was doing by doing that is he was getting the parabolic curve of the towers, which is what Poincaré was working on in his theories of quantum physics. So he created all his towers upside down and he calculated them out and then he inverted them. And that is what gave him the exact perfect dimension in space that he could do with those towers. Now, another reason that Gaudí's work is so important to me is it's so organic. It's one of the last organic structures, before Frank Lloyd Wright's works. I see some of the things happening with Cobb building now, kind of a replication of this. It was one of the last architectural movements before it went into like the work of Mies van der Rohe, a very contemporary glass. That is very much the technology direction of architecture. This was very much not technology. He utilized technology in it. That's what makes it so significant, but it is not technology. And I think it's critical to understand the distinction between using technology in this kind of organic way as opposed to losing connection with the organic piece of it and just going straight into technology that's disembodied. That's how I feel about the architecture. Now, here is a picture of one of the facades. The reason I have it here is because Gebser brought everything into it. If you travel to Spain, you will see, I also got to travel to Morocco. It is a melting pot of all kinds of mysticisms and all kinds of beliefs and all kinds of practices going on. So at the bottom you see all these birds. It's the conference of the birds from the Sufi tradition. And then you have the whole story of Jesus, and you have the whole pantheon of the birth of Christ. It just brings, there's just so much to see. I have a longer trip planned back to go and do a longer piece of writing about this because I just feel it's so, not understood, and it's crucial. This to me is one of the most significant images. I'm going to talk a lot about this image. You're all familiar with turtle. Turtle is really, really, really important. So when I went to see this, the tour guide, took us through and said, oh, well, Gebser liked animals. He included all these animals. He put the turtle in here. And well, I don't really know why, but the turtle's in here. He liked the turtle. And I'm thinking, you don't know why. I don't know if she really didn't know why, or if she was just suggesting that the mystery is for you to find out. One of the most important creation stories in the Chinese pantheon is from the I Ching, Book of Changes, and it tells the story of a mysterious and magical turtle that rises to the surface during the flooding waters of the Lo. So this turtle comes to the surface, and its shell is marked with a sacred inscription, and the sacred inscription is known as the Lo Shu, which means the pattern of the river Lo. So it tells it's a diagram of the universe. And this turtle comes up, and it's given as a sacred, it's given to the great cultural hero Yu by a dragon horse or a god in the shape-shifting form of a turtle. So we think of trickster, shapeshifter as the rabbit. The turtle is also a trickster or a shape-shifting form. You probably all know the Greek story of Hermes, who brings language to the Greek pantheon and guts the turtle and makes music from that. So for me, all of these stories are kind of connected. There's a parallel version called the Hotu'u model, which is said to have originated in a similar manner from a dragon horse in the Yellow River. These are from the Huayan Buddhism, sect of Buddhism, and they're in the number theory, wrote this esoteric science of numbers, and it came down from India to China. So it traveled from the Vedas and from the Indian tradition. But in this conception, number is thought to be an energetic continuum. So it's one that flows into the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. It's number as quality and intensity, not number as quantity. So when Gebser's speaking to number when he's speaking to quality and versus quantity, this is precisely what he's talking about. He's talking about, in Western consciousness, we have an awareness of number as a relationship to a one-to-one correspondence with things, and we give things value according to our ability to assign numeric value, monetary value to them. In an Eastern perspective, it's a quality. Things have a quality about them. And so your relationship to things is not what can I get from this, but what quality and energy and potency does this bring to the whole of everything. Very, very different way of looking at it. Here is a diagram of the from Tibet of the Lo Shu turtle. These symbols appeared on the back of the turtle in a series of dots, and these dots evolve into a larger schematic of the cosmos. But I'm going to skip a slide and come back because I want to talk about these dots in relationship to Arabic number theory, which here at the bottom is what is known as a magic number. When I was in 3rd grade, my teacher gave us a box and said, this is a magic number, figure it out. And it took me about 3 minutes and I figured out the magic number. I was the only person in class that figured it out. And I thought, whatever, no big deal. And it took me a lot of years to come back and realize like that was a gift. I mean, I have no idea why I figured the magic square out, why I had an affinity with it. If you add up every direction, it adds up to 15, which is a sacred number in Chinese representing some form of completion in Chinese. I wanted to bring a pen in so I could draw, because I like to draw. But if you look at this from another perspective, when you look at the number 1, 2, and 3, it forms a triangle. And then you look at the number 7, 8, 9, it forms the opposite triangle. So you've got 2 triangles like this. And then you look at 4, 5, 6, and it forms a line through those. And what that is that is the seal of Solomon, 2 triangles, which this is the complex piece. When you're talking about alchemy and you're talking about Maria Prophetessa, from the 1 comes the 2, from the 2 comes the 3, from the 3 comes the 4. It's a jump to understand how you do that, because that, without drawing it on here, if you think of a Seal of Solomon, you can add lines to it and visually make a cube, a 3-dimensional figure from the Seal of Solomon. So it's a shift in consciousness from the 3 to the 4, and that's what Jung's talking about. It's a shift from this number of completion, and number 6 is what is known as an aliquot number. It's like a complete number. It's a number of completion. There's a lot of numbers of completion, but it universally has a connection to that. Now, back to the Sagrada Familia, and back to the turtle. Another interesting thing is that this pillar is on top of the turtle, and when you walk up to the Sagrada Familia, there's 2 turtles in front of the north entrance, the main entrance. In Feng Shui, which is a part of the Taoist system, it's the I Ching and Feng Shui and all these practices are a part of a much larger tradition. The 2 pillars of Feng Shui are the Ho Tu'u and the Lo Shu pillars. So I don't think it's a coincidence that Gaudi put 2 pillars on the turtle's back in the Sagrada Familia. I just can't believe that that was a coincidence. So here on the side of the Sagrada Familia, you see what is not, the magic square we looked at is a 3rd order magic square. This is a 4th order magic square. There's 5th order magic squares. And I don't know enough about mathematics. I'm really interested in it now because of this. I sort of want to study, more math theory, but this adds up to 32 in any direction. It's connected to, astrologically, it's connected to Saturn, which is melancholy, which is the dark night of the soul. You're talking about St. John of the Cross and the underworld journey, or the dark night of the soul. Mathematically, that's what this represents. Here is a picture by Dürer, who, it's the same exact magic square. You see it on the side of the Sagrada Familia. So this was 1883 on through 1920. Right at that seminal time, the turn of the century, there was so much going on everywhere in consciousness. But this integration of this idea of alchemy and astrology and numerology and how it all fit together is just I just go crazy when I look at this stuff. So that's the magic square on the side. Now I'm going to talk, let's see what time it is. Okay, I'm going to talk really briefly about this. The ones on the right are the Lo Shu squares. The one on the left is the Ho Tu'u square, which for me is much more important. And if you look at the back of the turtle, you'll see that the same numbers you find in the magic square, like 3 and 7 on the other side, 5 in the middle. It is that 3rd order magic square. But to go to the Ho Tu'u square, it begins in the center, even though there's a 5 there. That is emptiness. That is Taoist emptiness. And from that comes the 1, then the 2, then the 3, then the 4. Then it returns to the center as the 5, emptiness. Round. It goes 6, 7, 8, 9. It returns to the center as number 10. And then number 11, that's the number of the Tao. That's the 10,000 things. So numerologically, it makes a single round and it returns to center. It makes a second round, it returns to center. We're talking about the twist, right? And that for me, it's representing the same thing. That if you take that twist, each of those is a 4 and a 4, that makes 8. So this is 2 8s, but they return to the center. The first one is what is considered generative, the first round of numbers. The second round is considered destruction. So the Taoist process is one of an in-breath and an out-breath. It's creation, it's destruction. It's creation, it's destruction. And from that, the 10,000 things. Always, always, always arising as intensity. Now, my thought about this is, what I think Gebser was getting after is, it doesn't matter what the externals are going on. Somebody alluded to this maybe with the writing of the poetry. It doesn't matter what the externals are. What matters is that you come to your own centered place. And in Chinese philosophy, this is their version of a number 5. It's called the quincunx, and it's connected to the quintessence. The difference between east and west is the eastern number 5 returns inward. The western number 5 becomes a pentagram and expands outward. So when Gebser's talking about expanded consciousness, this is what he's talking about. You cannot go and expand out and out and out and out. It's like blowing up a balloon, it's going to pop. You have to return. The movement is inward. The movement is in. So it's represented by a number inward. And when you go inward, you are reaching emptiness, the origin. And you see this quincunx design in the St. Peter's Basilica there, and it's used in Da Vinci's drawings, and this same diagram of this, quadrant. The 5 is considered the centered 4 in Eastern thought. It's the same as 4, but it's more centered and more complete. So it's the culmination of it, and it's not just the one time through it, it's the second time through it and the third time through it into everything. So I'd like to demonstrate that my idea of 5 is that 5 is related to the ether. Now 4 is related to the earth, 5 is related to ether. We don't live in the ether. I'm studying Ayurveda right now, and so one of the things about Ayurveda is if you have too much air, too much vata, too much not enough grounded earth, you'll die, because vata and earth are connected to the ether, and the ether is nothing. The ether is not grounded in the here and now. It's not grounded in the earth body. So each of these, in the Chinese, that drawing I showed you of the Ho-Tu square, each of those directions is an element. So there's I believe it's earth in the center, fire. I don't have it written down. I do have it written down. It's fire in the north, fire in the west, and water in the east, wood in the south, and metal in the north, and the earth is the center. But it's important to remember that the 5th place is also the ether from which everything arises. So number as a quality and a potency. 1 is the all-encompassing unity, the philosophical concept depicting the archetypal monad we call God or the Tao or source or creativity. It's as an energy, it's a unity. 2 becomes the reflection of that unity, and it happens by either having the one or by doubling it. When you think about that, that is the qualitative aspect, not the quantity, because a quantity would say it's just always going to be a double. 2 is always 2, 1 to 2. When you have it, now you're looking at it through a different lens. You're looking at it as a half of a whole or a half of another thing. 3 is considered the emergent that's born from the polarity of the 2, the conflict that happens between 2. We see that in politics. We're polarized. The 3rd that's trying to emerge is a recapitulation of the 1, but it's in a new form, and it's reflecting back to the 2, the 1 and the 2. It contains the 1 and the 2, and it's reflecting back. That's what makes it 6. 1, 2, and 3 makes it 6. 4 is the completion, and I talked about the doubling of form through that. And then 5 is the return to center as the perfected and centered 4, the quincunx. I love that idea. You look at architecture, you're going to see that everywhere you look in architecture now. Things are built around a center. That's how we found our universe. That's how we found our world. Now I want to point out, when I went to Spain, I got to see all kinds of, I went to every art museum I could find except the Guggenheim. I didn't get to see that one, but I saw everything I could see, every piece of art I could see, everything I could see. And I was surprised to discover that Juan Miró, who's a Spanish artist who worked along with Antonio Tapies, who's one of my favorite Spanish artists, he was Buddhist, was commissioned to make 2 tapestries for the World Trade Centers. And I thought, what? here's somebody commissioned to do something for these structures that I despise. I'm like so angry at this. What's going on? It's only later when I realized that he was working with the idea of the two pillars in Feng Shui, the low two in terms of creation. That the ideas that people are putting into the architecture we have are not that far off and far away from the turtle arising, from the turtle myth of the origins. It's the same mythos going on, and serving a different purpose. And I was in China when those got knocked down, so I got to see it from an Eastern perspective, which was completely, returned to a world that had completely changed from the one I left. And I was not able to relate at all to the people that were, I had a very different experience and a very different perception of it. And I was really happy to meet other people who had that perception too. Interestingly enough, there's twin towers called the Petronas Towers in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. So for me, these towers represent those two fundamental towers of creation. I have one more thing I'm going to do. I'm going to read you a poem by Mary Oliver, because this to me sums up what the aperspectival consciousness is all about. The summer day. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean, the one who's flung herself out of the grass, the one who's eating sugar out of my hand, the one who's moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, and who's gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings and floats away. I know what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I've been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Tell me what it is you plan to do with your one wild and precious life. And that's it for me. I plan to paint and write about that.
About 7 minutes for questions and comments.
Thank you for listening. Yeah. Yes.
I am so delighted. It's Sagrada Familia is probably my ideal beautiful building in the world.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And actually, my wife and I have like a pilgrimage. We go almost every year. And one of the things that I wonder how you feel about it, when Antonio Gaudi, which ironically I used him when I did my master's degree in architecture, that's why I'm connecting with that on a whole different level. When we went the last time, I discovered that they built the sculpture with using very light concrete, rather than chiseling the stone.
Yeah.
And it actually, from distance, you wouldn't even recognize that, but you go closer and you see there's something really missing. So I'm wondering your reception of how you assess that.
It reminds me of what you talked about moving the Sphinx and moving I mean, it's, there is an element of it being, the simulacra. There's an element of it being something that's not what it was. And then you also have to recognize that we're not in 1900, and we do have these new current, I mean, it's really hard to know. And I saw some controversy around that also, that, but the truth is he's deceased. You can't, the person even doing it isn't even Gaudi anymore. So how much of it has become something else already anyway? What I think is important to honor and recognize is what he was after in his construction of it, what the consciousness of it was, which for me, you talk about the Mediterranean way of life that Gebser had. I'm thinking, what does he mean? What does he mean by that? And Ortega y Gasset said it's this lived experience and the expression of that lived experience more than just the theory about that lived experience. So, in some ways they're recapitulating. They're doing just a theory because it's not relevant to their lives. And in another way, it's so important to have that concretized image. Gebser talks about that too. He says you have to have the concretized image, but you have to remember that the concretized image is not the aperspectival. The aperspectival is being in the center of, I didn't talk about this either, but those 4 dots on the quincunx, I think of those as where the immanent and transcendent meet, the cross. And so you have 2 modes of being and 2 modes of doing. The 2 modes of being are the archaic, which is Ouroboros, you're connected and unified with one, everything. The aperspectival is individuated, or individual, it's not even individuated, it's an individual perspective. The quincunx is the place that moves to the center between those, where it's an and both. Yes, I'm connected to everything, and yes, I have a distinct ego and a personality, and I have a work to do in the world, and I have a gift to do in the world, and this is how I'm manifesting it. And the ways that we do that, the ways that we practice our being is by doing, and those are the magical and the mythical structures, because language is a magical and mythical act. Creating a building is a magical and mythical act. Writing a dissertation is a magical and mythical act. I mean, if you've ever done it, you know, I think back and go, how the hell did I do that? It's just, we live in the world through magic and myth. And if you think that we don't, you're confused. And Gebser's idea about becoming transparent was recognizing in yourself and in the culture how much we still use magic and myth, you know? And we temper that through the efficient mode of reason. When it gets deficient is when it thinks it's off by itself and it thinks the rest are gone and they don't function. That's a deficient mode. An efficient mode is saying, I'm going to create something and I'm going to use every means that I have to be connected to other, to be an individual, to draw on magic, to, you know, pull the mythic piece in. When I was doing my early paintings, I had no conscious myth. I was living in chaos in LA, and it was like I was coming up off of I did a lot of my early work was abstract expressionism, and I was coming off this idea, you know, which was at the time for me, anything goes, you know, but I knew that that wasn't true. I knew that that movement had to be about something. It had to be about something. But I think when people take it and think it's not about something, they think it's just about making marks and I'm going to put my painting out there and I'm an artist, but they're not connected. They don't have a clue really what they're doing. You look at Mark Rothko's work, for me, I love Mark Rothko. He was coming from a place of the center of the quincunx, no image. He was coming from a place that was through an abstracted image trying to express an essence. And for most of those abstract expressionists, the American population hadn't a clue what they were doing. A lot of them committed suicide because they were like, why am I doing this? Nobody's getting what I'm doing. And they were, you know, they're funded by the EPA, and it's very hard with art to know who who's really bringing that forward and who's just sort of like doing an egoic exercise of, I'm an artist. And it's hard to know. It's one of the reasons I wanted to write about it, because I really wanted to talk about how I perceive it, understand it, and embody it. And anyway, I'm sorry.
We only have time for one short comment or question.
You had a question. Yeah.
Well, so one of them is, I'll make maybe a couple of very brief. One is, have you ever explored the work of Christopher Alexander?
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Christopher Alexander.
I'm not
An
familiar.
architect. He wrote a book. One of his books is called, the wonderful title, A Foreshadowing of 21st Century Art, where it's a catalog of his collection of Turkish rugs.
Wow.
And what he did with these rugs was he showed them, he looked at them every single day, fragments some of them. He showed them to people and he had asked them to identify which of them had more life. And the way in which people regularly chose the same ones, that people have an innate capability to determine what is more alive and less alive.
It's not presence.
And it's the quincunx.
Yeah.
It's the relationship between centers and peripheries, and creating multiple orders of centers and peripheries in meaningful context.
I wanted to say about the quincunx too, and I know I'm cut short, but what I'd rather have as a dialogue is kind of like what nesting, kind of like Gebser talking about nesting. For me, it's like if you study the Vedas or Ayurveda or anything like that, it's the koshas. You know, there's 5 koshas, and those koshas are ever increasing levels of density of matter. They begin in ether and they come up into the astral body, the subtle body, and there's like layers of the body. So I'll have to look for that book.
It's got a bunch. They're
Yeah.
all.
Yeah, my experience early on was that I did not come across the, Jung says, oh, if you paint long enough, you're gonna come up with this mandala figure. That never happened for me. That did not happen. My consciousness was so disconnected from all mythic stories. I was so much in the tyranny of the new. I talked about that earlier. I'm gonna create something new. I'm not gonna use any symbols from the old. I'm gonna create my new thing. I was so disconnected from consciousness that I was a mess. And there was no order. I discovered, oh, there's underlying order. It's a return. It's not the pentagon. I hate to say that, but that's the problem with our Western consciousness, is it's expanded.
Okay, well, a big debt of gratitude. Okay, there'll be